This is Christine Clapp. I'm the founder and president of Spoken with Authority, and I'm excited to be joined by three of our presentation skills experts to talk about small talk. As many of us are coming out of the pandemic isolation and we're going back to more social events and we're going to work events, we're having to engage in small talk again, and a lot of us are rusty. My team and I would love to give you some suggestions on how to approach small talk and how to do it so you could be more successful as you re-enter these social and professional situations. To start us off, Michelle Morrissey, could you tell us a little bit about the mechanics of small talk?
Yeah, Christine, when I think about small talk, I think about something you say often, which is basically all speaking is public speaking to a degree. But we really think of the anatomy of a conversation that it's simple, right? I'm talking, you're listening, and then we volley back and forth. But there are actually 6 events that are happening. I'm thinking about myself, I'm thinking about my communication partner, and I'm thinking about their perception of me. So be it a one-on-one conversation or speaking before a large group, the subconscious dynamics are pretty much the same. So I would say you want to think about 3 layers, which are initiation, maintaining, and closing the conversation. So the first tidbit I would say is beware of what's been termed FOPO, fear of other people's opinions, right? So we get caught up in what is this person going to think about me, etc. If we're in a networking situation, we're sometimes a little leery of what's called environmental mismatch. What do I really have in common with this person? So you want to always start by focusing on whatever your shared meaning is and talking about what brings you here. So after you just jump in the water and initiate that conversation, you want to maintain it by listening for what I call charge words. Most words carry some sort of charge, right? So be it it's something that it creates a strong visualization for you or a strong emotion, latch onto that and ask a follow-up question about that. And I call that kind of keeping the volleyball in the air. It's just as long as it goes to the next set of hands and makes it over the net, you've done your job. And finally, sometimes people just feel like they don't know how to close it. And I would say hit the highlights to seal the deal and just keep it moving. You want to hit the highlights of what was what were the key points of the pleasant parts of the conversation. Let the person know it was great to talk to them. Talk about next steps. Hey, I'm going to shoot you an email and hope we can follow up and have coffee, and then keep it moving. Go on to the next thing. So those are my tidbits of re-engaging in small talk as we get back into the post-pandemic communication world.
Thanks, Michelle. And I love that idea of thinking about an interpersonal conversation as like you would with a presentation where there's an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. So you start with the finding that shared meaning, then you have the volleys back and forth, which is the body of the conversation. You're looking for those charge words or where people are passionate. And then the conclusion is where a lot of people get stymied because they get into these conversations, they don't know how to get out of the conversation. And like you said, to recap some of the highlights, oh, it's so great to hear about your grandkids and your travel for summer. I hope you have a great time. And I can't wait to hear next time we see each other at the July meeting, so that you have that summary so people know, oh yeah, they're recapping, they're doing a conclusion, which is what we know what to listen for in a presentation. And you can also do that in a conversation. So that's really brilliant advice. Thank you for that. Jean, what is your advice for small talk?
Well, I really had my first foray into this at an event last week, which was attended by about 140 people. So it was one of those situations where a lot of people coming and quickly greeting you, where you're not even really getting into full conversations. They're just more quick greetings with a lot of people, which can be exhausting, particularly for someone who's introverted, all of the repetition of those greetings. And when I go into those events, I just carry with me sort of a mantra of 2 things: be positive and focus on the other person. And I find that as I remind myself that as I'm walking into the event, it just helps to keep everything on the up and up and keep me smiling, keep things moving. Nobody wants to hear complaints. Save those for situations where you're with your closer friends and you really can get into a real conversation. But just keep things positive, and always be sure to ask something of the other person, how they're doing, what brought them there, so that the focus is not all on you.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And the one of the questions that I like to ask that allows people to go in any direction, whether it's professional or personal or their hobbies, is what's the best thing that's happened to you this week? Or what's the best thing that's happened to you this month? So that you are keeping it positive, but letting them go the direction that they want to go. So you could get some of those charge words that Michelle was asking about. So I think that's a good one. And it can work for anyone in any situation. Because when you ask things like, oh, what do you do? And then someone's like, oh, well, my company just closed and I lost my job, right? Like, oh, so asking what's the best thing that happened to you this week, the person might say, oh, well, I had an interview because my company closed and so you can at least keep it positive, but still learn about people based on what they want to share with you. And the other piece of advice, I think, or perspective is important to keep in mind, which is that a lot of clients who I work with who are not comfortable with small talk, they always say, I don't know what to talk about. I don't know what to say when I'm in these situations. And the fact is that people who are best at small talk usually say the least. They listen and they ask questions. They listen for those charge words. They listen for what people are passionate about. And when you finally figure out, sometimes it takes a little digging to figure out what people are passionate about. But once you find it, if it's a hobby or an issue or a family, like grandkids or whatever, or their travel, they will go on and on and on, and you cannot get them to shut up. And then you really don't have to do a lot of work in the conversation. So if you don't know what to talk about, just know that's okay. Really work on asking questions and listening, because people really just want to talk about themselves. At the end of the day, they really don't want to hear that much about you because we're selfish and self-centered. So if you are uncomfortable with small talk, just know no one really wants to hear that much about you, and you're better served by asking about them anyways. So Christina, tell us about your insights on small talk and what advice you have for someone who has been in isolation and they're getting back into it and feeling a little awkward.
Yes. So I think this is definitely where self-awareness comes in, because one of the things that works really well for me is two things, actually. First of all, assessing your mood before the interaction. So maybe you're in a particularly cheery mood or energetic mood that day. Maybe it's a different kind of day and a different kind of mood. So depending on what your mood is, how you're feeling, I think it's really good to first examine that. So then you have a better sense of what you might be projecting when you go into small talk. That way you can kind of adjust. So if you know that today is a more social day for you, or a day where you're in the mood to be a little bit more social, you can really leverage that. But if it's a day where that's not the case, you can really manage your conversation, manage again what you're projecting, and manage how willing of a listener you're going to be. Give yourself a timeline. So if you say, I want to engage in small talk, but I think I only have the capacity to do this for about 5 to 10 minutes before my mind will need to move on to something else to be productive, then do that. So I think that's the first big tip that I have. It works wonders for me. And that's checking your mood before the interaction. And then once you get into it, or even again beforehand, just think about what you want to get out of the interaction. So small talk exists for different reasons. Sometimes it's to break the ice. Sometimes it's to get the listening audience comfortable. Sometimes ultimately it's to get information or relay information. So depending on the purpose behind the small talk, I think it's important to think about what you want to get out of it. That way, by the end of it, you would have done or said things that will lend towards that, and it'll just feel like a much more rewarding experience. It won't just feel like idle chatter. So that's two of my biggest pieces of advice for small talk.
I love those perspectives, and especially for people who dread small talk and I don't know what to say, to think about it and say, okay, I've been meaning to catch up with this person at work to learn about XYZ issue that we haven't been able to chat about, and using that opportunity to get something off their to-do list in a positive way. I really love thinking about it like that. And I also like this idea of we're rusty at small talk. So let's not go from 0 to 100 miles an hour. And just to say, yeah, for me to spend 15 minutes twice a week right now is what I can do. That's my capacity. Maybe next week it'll be 20 minutes twice a week, or maybe it'll be 15 minutes 3 times a week. So just to be really realistic about what we're ready to do and to have some grace with ourselves and to prioritize. As a professional, there are places where you probably really need to socialize in order to make sure that you are developing yourself and maintaining the relationships that you need to. And you might have to look at your calendar and decide and make a list of, okay, these are the top 2 or top 3 for this week or this month, so that you can keep the energy for the ones that are most important and then politely decline or make other arrangements for times where it's less important. So I love that advice, and to think about it in terms of energy maintenance, which is a really great practice to get into the habit of. For me, in terms of small talk, one of my suggestions for folks who feel a little bit awkward in small talk situations is to think about areas that you can come up with conversation items. And this might be on a weekly basis or even in the morning for a couple minutes as you're drinking your coffee or reading through the daily briefing, is to take a few minutes to do some reading in places that you may not be as comfortable talking about. So for example, I know Jean really is, she follows sports very closely. So for her, going into a setting and being able to talk about sports or who the Washington football team drafted or what's going on with training camp, that's very easy. But maybe for someone who she's talking to where sports is not something that they know about or like to discuss, maybe Jean has to take a look at a newspaper and read over some book reviews or movie reviews to see what's going on, take a look at the lifestyle section to see some of the things that are going on in the city, whether it's a concert, music concert, maybe Jean is or isn't into music concerts, but just having an awareness of what's going on and reading some of those reviews of books, reading those reviews of movies, whether or not you are a huge movie goer or a concert goer, I think can be really helpful. And just also thinking about things on the calendar. So coming up is Father's Day. So if you have a colleague and you know they're a parent and their kids are a big part of their life, you might think about asking questions about that. Or if you know someone has kids, it's the end of school. So asking about when their kids' school gets out and what their plans for summer are. We can think about these types of topics and use them as ways to engage with people who we know have interest in those various areas. But obviously you do have to have some insight or background into the person, because if you ask the question to the person who's been wanting to have kids for 10 years and it hasn't worked out for them, and you ask them, what are you doing for Father's Day, right? That can be a really tough one. So I do think you have to be really careful and thoughtful, and for people you don't know as well, to make those questions really broad and open, like, what's the best thing that happened to you this week, so that you don't step on any landmines in those conversations. Well, Michelle and Jean and Christina, as always, it's really great to hear your suggestions and expertise. And hopefully folks who are watching this will feel a little bit more prepared to go back into small talk, whether they are doing it for social reasons with their friends and family, or whether they are going back to in-person work and professional events. Thank you.